Welcome to this edition of Fuel for Thought. I'm Mark Rechtin, Executive Editor of S&P Global Mobility. While most other industries have transitioned away from a bricks and mortar to a digital retail model for well more than a decade, this counts travel services, consumer packaged goods, even banking, the car buying process has remained a very traditional in-person process, until now. It's not a new idea. The theories of no-haggle pricing, direct-to-consumer, and the agency model have traditionally been bandied about the auto industry every decade or so, and it gets lots of attention. But then they tend to fizzle out as the weight and influence of traditional relationships between OEMs and franchise dealers brings that conversation to a close. But COVID changed all that. Not being able to physically go to a dealership changed the dynamic of car shopping, and it turns out a lot of consumers like the new way. And disruptor automakers such as Tesla and Rivian aim to capitalize on this as first movers. A recent S&P Global Mobility survey, called Vehicle Buyer Journey, found that consumers are making their voices heard, loud and clear, that incorporating more digital tools into the automotive retail process will absolutely have an effect on where and how they buy their next car. In today's episode of Fuel for Thought, we'll be looking deeper into this issue. Joining us today are two subject matter experts from S&P Global Mobility, Tanja Linken, Consulting Executive Director, and Grant Gitre, Consulting Associate Director. Good day to you both. Let's start with Tanja, who oversaw this global survey. It's a well-known truism that the experience of buying a car from a dealership ranks only slightly higher than getting a root canal. But people have endured the process for more than a century. What makes you think that now, of all times, we have the dynamic for radical change in the automotive retail scene?
That's a very good question, Mark. And you mentioned the COVID lockdowns that have completely changed our buying behavior, probably forever. So that's certainly one aspect. A survey that we conducted during the peak of the pandemic back in 2020 did show nearly 2/3 of transactions involved some degree of e-commerce. So that trend is unbroken until today, and consumers are demanding more and more online options. But as much as we want to believe that manufacturers finally want to make the process better for consumers, unfortunately, I don't think that's the true driver. The biggest driver for change always was and still is cost pressure. So let's face it, the industry transitioning towards EVs is expensive. So all manufacturers need to look for efficiencies. And most manufacturers have indeed identified significant cost saving opportunities in cost of retail. So when we talk to manufacturers, their expectations range between 2 to 5% cost reduction opportunity as a result from retail transformation. They're looking at lower incentive spend due to no haggle pricing, higher gross profit per vehicle, reduced staffing due to a simplified and more digitized process, and last but not least, optimized stock management with significantly reduced number of demo cars and higher share of built-to-order vehicles. So that's what I believe is really going to break the habits and change auto retail.
Okay, Grant, let's talk about what Tesla has accomplished with this sort of model. They started the no franchise, no haggle retail model and came across significant resistance. There are still many states in America where automakers can't sell cars directly to consumers, and yet Tesla is making it work somehow, at least for now. How can Tesla achieve any sort of market dominance if it's hindered from selling in nearly half of the states in the US?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I do agree. Tesla is definitely making it work, both in direct to consumer states and in non direct to consumer states. And overall, I think their success is due to their entire experience. So, including the purchase process, but also their charging service, the whole thing. In non-direct consumer states, they're essentially selling through loopholes today. So, depending on the local laws, people are having to purchase new Teslas in a different state than where they live, or title it through a third party, et cetera. Even with all the industry challenges recently, Tesla is on track this year to sell 600,000 vehicles in the US. This would be about three times what they sold pre-COVID in 2019. The interesting thing to me is not just the increase in volume, it's that they had an almost 80% market share of battery electric vehicles in 2019 compared to 60% so far in 2023, even with three times the volume. So while they're still ramping up sales, so are other brands coming out with new EV market entrants. And I think that once more EVs from these traditional brands hit the market with volume and the EV game becomes more competitive, I don't know that we'll see Tesla continuing to have quite the same edge that they're used to. Like I said earlier, Tesla does a lot of things really well, and that appeals to a lot of people. But I think mass market consumers will be less likely to jump through these loopholes of buying a Tesla in a non direct to consumer state and maybe opt for the brand they can buy in a traditional way, whether that now means online or in a physical dealership. Overall, I don't think that customers care who is actually selling them the vehicle between the dealer or OEM. What they do care about is their experience and ease and efficiency. All in all, I don't see Tesla adopting any kind of traditional retailer strategy anytime soon, but I see them getting more creative to better hide the hoops customers have to jump through to purchase.
This deserves a real follow up here. Taking this process to the next level is Rivian, which doesn't have any physical dealerships at all. It has service centers, which also serve as repositories for new vehicle inventory, which is then delivered to consumers for test drives and sales. But the entire purchasing process is handled online with a Rivian guide to handle any questions. Do you see this working if Rivian ever achieves scale, or are they going to have to move to a brick and mortar model at some point?
I think a lot of what I said before would also apply to Rivian. I think some of these models can work in the short term while there's novelty, but then wear off as we reach a new normal with EVs and disruptor brands. But that's a great distinction you make, Mark, that Rivian doesn't have physical retail locations, the galleries, studios, or anything else. So in a non-direct to consumer state where Tesla has a physical gallery, you can still go, but you can't drive off with something off the lot. But you can be there in person to experience the brand, look at, get in and out of the cars, and talk to an expert about them face to face. With the Rivian model, it's all online. And I'll be honest, when I first heard about the Rivian guide, I thought it was like an instruction manual or something. But it's actually a person that gets assigned to you to help you through the purchase process, which I do think is a much better solution than the book that I thought it was. Like I said, though, I think that Rivian will see success with this model early on with the early adopters. But as EVs become more mainstream and the broader population begins to consider them, I think, as we found in our vehicle buyer journey survey, people still want that physical touch point during the sales process or consideration. And I think Rivian will start to lose potential customers without it. So, to answer your question, I see Rivian having some kind of physical presence down the road to reach their full potential. And I've actually seen on their website that they plan to share soon where people can see their vehicles in person. So maybe there's already something in motion for physical retail.
Back to Tanya. Our vehicle buyer journey survey showed that a lot of consumers in many global markets are interested in taking more elements of the purchase process online, even if it means driving farther for some parts of the process compared to a more local, non digital dealer. What are consumers really asking for here?
Yeah, so as Grant just mentioned, I believe it's important first and foremost to say that the vast majority of consumers don't want a completely remote process. Actually, less than 2% of the consumers in our survey said that they would expect the entire process to be online. Um, Consumers in general still want to touch, feel, test drive the vehicle before they purchase, but they want to do it at their terms. So some general pattern that we saw from the consumer survey, consumers want to worry less about the actual transaction. Steps such as the price negotiation, used vehicle trade-in, signing the contract, etc., are seen as very cumbersome and could be more efficient online. But we also see increased demand for remote vehicle delivery options, something that's not generally offered today by all brands. Customer convenience is key here, and the term convenience needs to be redefined. Driving to a dealership and browsing through huge selections of inventory is no longer deemed convenient for most consumers. So the location of physical touch points is shifting. And that may further increase the pressure on highly dense dealer networks. 60% of the consumers surveyed did actually state that they did not go to their nearest dealer for the last purchase, but purchased from a dealer further away from their home that offered online and remote service options.
Okay, so that's also worthy of a follow-up. What are we hearing now from the flip side of the equation, from the legacy automakers themselves? They have thousands of franchise dealers in their systems, and they do have a choice in retailing EVs. I mean, they could take two different paths. Do automakers want to sell them in the traditional way? It's just another powertrain. Or are they looking at carving out separate retail enterprises just for electrics?
Yeah, that's actually very exciting. And strategies obviously vary by manufacturer and brand and country even. But we do see some interesting spin-offs and EV specialized retail approaches. EVs are being used as a lever to push the boundaries of traditional bricks and mortar retailing, in fact. In the US, several brands have introduced elevated dealer standards, some even buyout packages, specific dealer certification programs, for example. While in Europe, some major OEMs go to market with a so-called BEF agency contract, a direct-to-consumer sales model that's specific to the electric vehicle lineup, while the traditional model lineup remains under franchise dealership agreements. Well, my thought here is very soon EVs will be the majority of new vehicles sold to the market. In fact, they already are today in markets like China, Norway, or even San Francisco Metro, where they peaked about 50% very recently last month. So then all those EV-specific retailing programs will just become the new normal of how consumers will buy cars anyway. With that then in mind, I believe OEMs don't do their brands any favor by separating the marketing approaches for EVs versus internal combustion engine vehicles. It just makes the whole transition even harder. At the end of the day, they still sell that one brand, and in my opinion, they should do so with a consistent message to the market. That being said, retail transformation should not be isolated to just EVs, in my opinion. But the disruptive power of EVs may be leveraged as a lever to break the traditional bricks and mortar model.
So, how does that new showroom look and feel in a digital first world?
Well, I think downsizing of showroom space is going to be the first visible effect. With fewer inventory on site, we can also expect more diversified types of showrooms, small or large, depends, but always tailored to a certain part of the customer journey. And generally thinking people first, cars second. I also believe digitization cannot stop at the doorstep. So digitally enabled tools will come to the showrooms and will complement the physical product experience in store. So that's the look. But you ask about look and feel. So more importantly, the feel. And that's all about people creating hospitality. And so how do we break the habits of decades of sales reps that were trained on a purely transactional and commission-based process, so their entire career, and now suddenly they are being asked to become true brand ambassadors. That's going to be a challenge.
Okay. Back to Grant. We've been talking sort of in an omni sense about the results of this vehicle buyer journey survey, but there were actually some really interesting regional discrepancies. Care to walk us through some of them?
Yeah, for sure. So there were a few different things we could focus on, but for today, something that I thought was particularly interesting from the survey was within the responses of customers that said they chose a dealership further away because of online options. And Tanya mentioned that earlier. So if you just take that pool of people, which across Europe, China, and the US was about 70% of those surveyed in 2022, across all of those regions, the majority of people claimed that the specific reason for doing so was because they were able to complete parts of the actual purchase process online. But what's interesting is there's another group of customers that selected a dealer further away due to online pricing and offer comparisons. So out of this group of people, almost double the amount of customers surveyed in China and Europe claimed this being the main reason over those in the US. To summarize that a little bit, the online comparison of offers and pricing seemed to be more important to our customers in China and Europe than those in the US. US customers skewed even more heavily toward completing parts of the process online.
Okay, so let's stick with you here, Grant. And we've been talking a lot about how OEMs have to change, dealers have to change, but this still involves a lot of customer change as well. And a lot of car shoppers still want to experience the vehicle before they buy it. For most folks, it's the second most, if not the most, expensive individual purchase they will make in their lives. It's a big deal. It's also very emotional. So if you have a digital heavy model, How do you accommodate those folks who need to see, hear, smell, and feel their potential purchase and do so across maybe multiple vehicles, multiple brands that they might be choosing from?
Yeah, so I think whether we're talking traditional brands or disruptors, and if it's a brand starting from a digital heavy environment or transitioning over to it, the physical interaction definitely still needs to be considered. We've talked extensively about how automotive retail is rightfully moving toward online because customers are asking for that digital convenience. But you're right, Mark, we're talking about a major purchase and one that normally requires extensive research, which doesn't exclude these physical senses from the process. So I think that depending on the brand and footprint, there are several options like maybe an experience center or even the gallery studios, pop-ups, et cetera, that we're already seeing, potentially adding test drives to those. And speaking of test drives, our research finds that over 80% of car buyers still want them. And an increasing number of test drives are being completed right at the customer's home, with retailers bringing the car to them. So overall, I think leaning into digital is a must, but so is keeping the ability for customers to physically experience the product and the brand.
Okay, we've covered a lot. Now it's time for the lightning round for both of you with just a touch of role play. If you had just acquired a Ford or a Toyota or a Jeep dealership with a rundown showroom, how would you redesign it to embrace this new digital environment? Would you tear it all down and build a service only site, park the vehicle inventory out back, and make it all retail digital?
Well, I'm going to go first. I believe it's a tough environment out there for entrepreneurs in auto retail. So, had I just acquired a dealership, I'd hope to have the scale and investment to not only change bricks and mortar, but more importantly, focus on data, systems, and people. Yes, brick and mortar is still important. We talked about that. So, I would capitalize on that advantage and not tear it down completely, but I would right size ruthlessly to make it profitable. Throughout the stock, build a less product centered and more people centered environment. A showroom should not feel impressive and not intimidating. It should be welcoming. So that would be my focus. But a modernized showroom alone would not do the job for me. We need different type of staff, so focus on training, and to really make omnichannel retailing work, we need data and integrated systems. So I recommend focus on platforms and customer data linkage is key.
Yeah, and based on my previous answers, I think you probably know where I'm going with this, and it's actually somewhat similar to what Tanya's saying. Mark, I think you nailed it for me with the words embrace the digital environment and not a purely digital environment. I'm probably going to make this sound a lot easier than it actually would be, but the first thing that I would look to do would be to build out a digital retail process that could seamlessly integrate the digital with the physical, be able to flip back and forth and allow for either at any time. To reference our vehicle buyer journey survey again, we've seen that the top parts of the sales process that people want to complete online are, as previously mentioned, negotiating the vehicle price, F&I, scheduling test drives, and negotiating trade-ins. I think ideally, customers should be able to complete some, all, or none of the process physically or online, depending on their level of comfort between the in-person or digital process. If we were able to achieve this hybrid environment, I think this would free up space from the old school, purely transactional setup with the sea of sales desks, F&I offices, et cetera, and allow for a more comfortable focus on the brand and product relationship with the customer. Maybe more education areas or elements that lean toward the intended brand experience. And Tanya, I know you and I have had a similar conversation about this before. All of these things being said, I think that the first point of focus through all of this talk of transition to digital and relationship over transaction should be on the core needs of the customer. And going back to another earlier point, I mentioned customer experience. I think we need to be able to efficiently serve our customers' needs in a cost effective way before we can get to the point of adding elements for the surprise and delight.
All right. Obviously, we have just scratched the surface of this issue, and we could delve into many more related issues confronting the retail side of the industry, but our time is up. Thanks to our experts for joining us today, and thanks to you for listening. That was a lot to unpack, but I hope you all feel smarter and more informed for having tuned in. And if so, please share this podcast link with your colleagues and in your social media accounts. And to opt into our newsletter that provides more information on this topic and others, please visit spglobal.com/mobility. And if you want to learn more about this topic, please feel free to reach out to us at that same web address. We'll be back with more Fuel for Thought next month.